All right, let me move this out of the way here and we will jump into what we're talking about today. So, this is part two. Um, and what we're going to be talking about is the actual American Empire. So, let's start part two off by looking at this highly inappropriate magazine cover from um, 1899. And in it, you have President William McKinley, and by the way, this is an actual like men's bathing suit from back in the day, styling, um, in the Potomac River, washing this screaming heathen creature. In the background, with these two weird-looking troglodytes putting on funky red, white, and blue pajamas. Um, and look in the background, there's the Capitol building. So McKinley is washing or bathing or baptizing in the waters of civilization the Filipino, giving the Filipino his first bath. Now, I have never seen anybody that looks anything remotely close to this outside of like looking at the freak shows that attend like Burning Man or something, let alone anybody who looks like this. This cartoon, this magazine cover, is actually representative of a concept at the time. Okay. These two guys in the background here, it's a little bit hard to see, but this one is Cuba and this is Puerto Rico. Imperialism, which is the subject of this magazine cover, is the process of acquiring or taking over other places in order to benefit those places by exposing them to your culture and civilization. And the idea in the picture here is that the screaming savage Filipino will soon be in the back putting on the really cool pajamas like these guys when McKinley washes him in the waters of civilization. Imperialism is a very progressive ideal that is very easily adapted by the right wing. And what we're going to talk about is how America sort of falls into this idea of being an imperial power. So we're going to start by looking at the year 1896. And in 1896, there is another presidential election going on. The Democrats are a complete train wreck of a party. They cannot decide who it is that they are or what they want to be. Northern and Eastern Democrats, those like, say, in the New England states, really support the idea of Grover Cleveland for a third term. Cleveland, by the way, wants nothing to do with this. He is angry and bitter at his party and at politics, and he just wants gone. But nevertheless, he going into the Democratic Convention in 1896 in Chicago is the front runner of a large number, albeit not the majority, of Democrats. The problem is the other areas of the country, the Western and Southern Democrats who favor silver or the bimetallic standard, don't know who they want, but they just know that they don't want Cleveland. 2/3 of the vote is needed to secure the nomination. The Gold Democrats who support Cleveland are angry at the lack of cooperation that they're getting from the rest of the party and, quite frankly, what they view as a radicalism in the party, and they refuse to participate. They actually walk out of the convention. At the end of 5 rounds of voting, a 36-year-old congressman, a member of the House of Representatives from Nebraska, William Jennings Bryan, there he is in all of his glory, normal looking, wins the Democratic nomination. Now, Bryan was an unknown. In fact, if you really look at this, okay, Bryan is 36 years old, which is only 1 year older than the bare minimum required to be president. He is the youngest man ever to run for president. He has one incredible talent that he is almost unsurpassed in, and that is he is an amazing public speaker. So he goes into the convention with nobody really knowing who he was. Well, at the end of round one, when it becomes apparent that Grover Cleveland is not going to win, Brian throws himself out there as a possibility. And he has very little interest in round two. But he starts to meet people and talk with them and everything else. And the more he talks to people, the more impressed they are with him. So by round three, he gets a few more votes. Round four, he has a majority, but not two-thirds. And by round five, he has enough support with the Gold Democrats refusing to be a part of this to win the nomination. And he delivers one of the most famous speeches in American history, the Cross of Gold, where he compares the gold standard and the support of it to the crucifixion of Christ. In reading the speech, which we did at least in part, we read excerpts from it. It is very inflammatory. It sounds a lot like socialism, if not outright communism in some spots. A lot of what he says makes people very uncomfortable. And he's not fully wrong in some of his assertions either, which, we talk about when we look at the speech. But it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. And Brian comes out with the support of mostly the Western and Southern Democrats, particularly the lower income Democrat Party, raring to go at the Republicans, who, unlike the Democrats, have no problem picking a nominee. Their nominee is former Ohio Senator William McKinley, he of the McKinley Tariff. McKinley and his support are a strange alliance of businessmen, industrialist entrepreneurs, skilled workers and union members, and upper middle class farmers. Basically, anybody who benefits from having the gold standard. McKinley may be the most important person in the Republican Party in terms of the candidate, but he is not the most powerful person in the party. That person is Ohio businessman Mark Hanna, who, by the way, kind of looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy in a suit. Mark Hanna was the real genius behind the Republicans. He was the chief of the Republican Party. And notice I said Ohio businessman. This is why McKinley was from Ohio. If you go back and you take a step back, McKinley's from Ohio. Grover Cleveland was from Ohio. Rutherford B. Hayes from Ohio. Ulysses S. Grant from Ohio. There's a specific pattern here. And not to break that pattern too much, you had Benjamin Harrison, who's from Indiana, right next to Ohio. Mark Hanna oversees a brilliant campaign on the part of McKinley. McKinley stays home. He goes nowhere. He sits on his front porch. He will talk to anybody who comes to see him, but he stays home because his wife suffers from a seizure disorder called epilepsy. And the Republicans play this up, and the media eats it up. The way that William McKinley stays behind to care for his sick wife is how William McKinley is going to care for America as a loving, devoted husband. And the Republicans play this up, and they also just hammer at Brian as being dangerous to America and dangerous to America's prosperity and too radical to be president. Brian is not only nominated by the Democrats, he's nominated by three political parties: the Democrats, the Populists, and a group known as the Silver Party or the Silver Republican Party. They're Republicans who broke away from the Republican Party because of the support of the issue of silver. They're very progressive Republicans. Brian is nominated by all three of these parties with three different vice presidential candidates. They figure when he wins, they'll just let him sort out who his VP is. His support is mainly unskilled workers, the lower classes, the farmer, and Western citizens and settlers. Basically, anybody who benefits from inflation and from silver. Their whole campaign strategy is letting Brian do what he does best, which is give speeches. And Brian gets on a train and he goes across the country giving speeches. And specifically, he focuses on those swing states that keep voting and deciding who wins the election. Um, the basic strategy of the Democrats is to portray McKinley as the puppet of Mark Hanna. He's just going to be Mark Hanna's little, gopher and do what he wants without having any real agenda. The real genius of the campaign for the Republicans is they simply shift the conversation from from William Jennings Bryan's strength, which is the gold issue and the silver issue, to the issue of tariffs, which McKinley knows all about because he proposed the McKinley tariff. Bryan has very little knowledge outside of like his gold and silver issue. And like largely it just has to do with the fact that he's young and being from Nebraska, there ain't a lot going on there that he worries about. The Republican strategy works marvelously, and in many respects, this is the first modern style political campaign. This, by the way, is William McKinley, who looks like he's undead. He is also the inspiration for Muppet Sam the Eagle. When Jim Henson was designing the Muppets, they wanted to make somebody to base like Sam the Eagle, who's the American eagle, bald eagle, and they picked William McKinley to base him on. The election is, in many respects, the first modern style election. The Republicans campaigned by really focusing on Bryan's weaknesses, attacking him personally, and going after the areas that he simply cannot deal with, and avoiding the areas that he's really good at. Mark Hanna raised money to support William McKinley like a business plan. He would go to like bankers and industrial entrepreneurs and say, look, you big unions, you guys are happy with the tariffs, you're happy with the protection of jobs, the protection of your products, with the protection of American markets, with all the money coming in, you're happy with all of how valuable the dollar is and low inflation. That's because it's from my boy. And how about ponying up some money from my boy? And these people give money directly to the Republican Party. It's done just like a business plan. They outraise and outspend the Democrats 5-1. That means for every dollar the Democrats spend on campaigning and advertising and politicking, the Republicans spend 5. And if you look at the trends in modern campaigns, it's the party that spends the most money that generally will win every time. McKinley doesn't just win, he easily beats Bryan. He beats him by over 600,000 votes and wins 95 more electoral college votes, including the swing states. McKinley is inaugurated as the 25th president, and he gives a very nice speech, not a Bryan level speech, but a nice speech, outlining his plans for U.S. prosperity, which involves lots of business, lots of money being made, and staying out of foreign affairs. Particularly, we are not going to get directly involved in disagreements between foreign countries, nor are we going to go to war with anybody just to gain territory. And it may seem kind of odd that he says this, but he makes a big point of this, and that's because part of the Republican platform was the idea of expansion, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But also, his warning kind of sets up the fact that we're not going to go to war with people to gain stuff from them, but we are going to go to war if necessary to defend ourselves. And this is preparing America because a war is coming, whether we like it or not. And that war, oddly enough, was Spain. Particularly over the issue of Spain's colony, Cuba. Spain is the last European country with colonies still in the Western Hemisphere. In 1869, just 4 years after the end of the Civil War, there was a slave revolt on Cuba, and yes, Spain still allowed slavery. While America was officially neutral, we were in favor of the Cuban rebels. We Americans, because our natural history is one of rebellion and winning independence from a tyrannical monarchy, when it comes to supporting a revolution or an underdog, We are there. We really support the underdog. You still see this today in the attitudes of America when it's like rebels against a what is perceived to be an oppressive regime. The revolt broke out in Cuba in 1869. America was officially neutral, even though the citizens of America really did support the Cubans. The Spanish easily put down the slave revolt, but wouldn't you know it, 6 years later, they revolt again. And this becomes a pattern where every 5 to 7 years there's a slave revolt in Cuba, and every time America is dragged a little bit closer to the issue. For those of you who don't know, Cuba is only 90 miles away from the United States. Cuba is closer to us than we are to Chicago. Okay, Cuba is closer to America than Milwaukee is to Chicago. In 1875, there is another slave revolt. Now, what causes a big stink then is off the coast of Florida, a private U.S. boat named the Virginius is intercepted by a Spanish ship. The ship pulls over the Virginius with illegally. It boards the Virginius illegally. It searches it illegally. And when it discovers that the Virginius has a secret like storage hold full of guns, medical supplies, money, and support equipment for the Cuban rebels, the Spanish Navy executes all the American citizens on board as pirates. This is an act of war, but we don't end up going to war in 1875. We would have talked about it if we did. Why not? Because, quite frankly, in 1875, then President Ulysses S. Grant recognized that if the United States went to war, we would lose. Our Navy, which was still wooden ships, was no match for the Iron Navy of Spain. Now, you may be sitting there, but Mr. G, we learned in history about like the Monitor and the Virginia or Monitor and the Merrimack, that battle in the Civil. Yeah, we had those goofy looking metal boats. The problem is those boats were Coast Guard ships. If you went any more than 20 or 30 miles off the coast, they would sink because they weren't designed to go into deep water. Spain had a modern, up-to-date Iron Navy. Now, why are we even concerned with this? I mean, it's one thing to support rebels. It's another thing to get all beastie about this. But why are we so passionate about it? Well, it's because Americans had invested a lot of money in Cuba in the form of sugar farming, just like in Hawaii. In fact, Cuba sold more sugar to America than they did to Spain, who owned it. And the American businesses in Cuba were not so subtly just making the argument that, hey, if you guys weren't controlled by Spain, all of this money would be going to you, not Spain. And the Spanish were well aware of what was going on in Hawaii. This, by the way, is a political cartoon from a Spanish newspaper at the time. The fraternal care of Uncle Sam guarding the island. Notice this freakish looking thing that looks like Slender Man over here. It's very clear to the Spanish that what Uncle Sam wants is not to guard the island or guard what was going on. It was to take over Cuba. That's what America is interested in. Now, going along with this is a seemingly maybe unrelated incident, and that is a book written by an American naval officer named Alfred Thayer Mahan. Alfred T. Mahan, later Admiral Alfred Mahan, was a naval historian and obviously officer in the U.S. Navy who did a thorough study of the relationship of naval power to commercial and military success throughout history. And his conclusion was that every great nation in history had a great navy supporting its economy and its trade. And that if the U.S. wants to be a great nation, it too needs a great navy. So when we look at the great naval buildup of the 1880s, there are three reasons that cause it. Mahan's book is one of them. And by the way, the U.S. is not the only country that reads Mahan's book, and it has a profound effect on them. Germany, the Emperor of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II, is a huge fan of Mahan, and he devotes Germany's efforts to attempt to build the largest navy in the world, which is a ridiculous concept, especially given the fact that, like, literally right across, the North Sea, you're looking at England. But um, Alfred Mahan's book, the inability to defend ourselves in the event of a war with Spain because our navy is that bad, and going back to Germany, Krupp's big guns from the 1876 World's Fair, all three influenced the decision to modernize the Navy over the 5 administrations, with James Garfield in 1880 and running through Grover Cleveland in 1893. And this is where we're going to pick this up tomorrow, where we talk about why it is that America is so interested in this whole concept to begin with. Peace and love. Peace and love.